If you're interested in watching the blockbuster movie Goal, Van Helsing in English, make sure to like this video. If you're new to our channel, don't forget to subscribe. Today we'll be discussing a classic film, Van Helsing. We'll cover everything about this movie, including what it's about, where you can watch it, and some fascinating facts. I'll also provide details on which streaming platforms or satellite channels offer this film. In this video, we'll dive into the technical aspects, the music and the pre-production, filming, and post-production phases. We'll also talk about the movie's budget and box office performance. Additionally, we'll discuss the plot, give a brief review, and go over the facts surrounding the film's storyline and star cast, along with the actors' performances. I'll also explain which actor played each character. So, I invite you to watch this video until the very end. Let's begin. Van Helsing, released in 2004, is a gothic action horror film that combines elements of classic monster mythology with the adrenaline-fueled pacing of a modern Hollywood blockbuster. Written and directed by Stephen Sommers, who had previously helmed The Mummy, 1999, and its sequel The Mummy Returns, 2001, Van Helsing was envisioned as a reimagining of Universal's legendary monster properties. The film blends horror, fantasy, and action to create a high-octane cinematic experience that pays homage to the early days of horror cinema while attempting to reframe it for a new generation of moviegoers. The story revolves around Gabriel Van Helsing, played by Hugh Jackman, a mysterious monster hunter working for a secret religious organization headquartered in the Vatican. His mission is to track down and eliminate evil creatures threatening the world, particularly those derived from Eastern European folklore and Western horror classics. The film opens with a black-and-white sequence reminiscent of the 1930s Universal monster films, introducing audiences to the classic characters of Dr. Frankenstein and his monster, only to be disrupted by the arrival of Count Dracula. This dramatic entry sets the tone for a film filled with gothic castles, dark forests, supernatural beings, and intense action sequences. Hugh Jackman, who stars as the titular Van Helsing, was at a pivotal point in his career when he took on this role. Best known at the time for his portrayal of Logan, also known as Wolverine, in the X-Men franchise, Jackman had quickly become one of Hollywood's most in-demand leading men. The X-Men films, beginning in 2000, had established him as an action hero with depth and charisma, and Van Helsing sought to build on that persona. In this film, Jackman channels a rugged, tormented energy into Van Helsing, portraying him as a man haunted by his past, driven by a moral imperative to fight evil, and yet grappling with the possibility that he, too, might be something other than fully human. Opposite Jackman, Kate Beckinsale plays Anna Valerious, a Romanian princess and vampire hunter whose family has been cursed by Dracula for generations. Beckinsale brought to the role a combination of steely resolve and graceful strength, embodying the kind of action heroine that had become increasingly popular in early 2000s cinema. She had already found success in the vampire action genre with her role as Selene in Underworld, 2003, a film that would go on to spawn a franchise and cement her status as a star in action fantasy circles. In Van Helsing, Beckinsale's Anna is both an emotional anchor and a combatant, showcasing a fiery determination to avenge her family's tragic history and rid her homeland of its supernatural plague. As the film unfolds, Van Helsing and Anna join forces to hunt down Dracula, who is portrayed by Richard Roxburgh in a flamboyantly menacing performance. This version of Dracula is equal parts aristocratic villain and unhinged megalomaniac, seeking to bring his undead children to life using Frankenstein's technology. Roxburgh, an Australian actor, had previously portrayed the Duke in Moulin Rouge, 2001, and Sherlock Holmes' nemesis Professor Moriarty in The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, 2003. His Dracula is not merely a predator, but a mastermind orchestrating a web of terror with cunning, charm, and a deep sense of theatricality. The film's narrative structure takes viewers on a whirlwind tour through Gothic Europe, from the rooftops of Paris to the fog-shrouded forests and snow-covered peaks of Transylvania. Van Helsing is tasked with uncovering the link between Dracula, the Frankenstein monster, and a secret that may unlock both the curse afflicting Anna's family and the key to stopping Dracula's resurrection plans. The film's action is relentless, with extended battles involving werewolves, vampires, undead brides, and even an airborne attack on a ruined castle. The pace is deliberately breathless, favoring movement over introspection, in keeping with the tone Sommers had set in his earlier Mummy films. Visually, Van Helsing is a rich tapestry of Gothic influences, drawing from the expressionistic style of early horror cinema while integrating cutting-edge digital effects that were, at the time, considered groundbreaking. The cinematography by Allen Daviau, combined with elaborate set designs and an orchestral score by Alan Silvestri, creates a world where the supernatural feels both grand and immediate. The use of CGI to bring creatures like Dracula's flying brides and the werewolves to life was met with both awe and criticism, depending on the viewer's appetite for digital spectacle. Some praised the boldness of the visuals, while others found them overly artificial, but few denied the ambition behind the film's aesthetic. Van Helsing is notable for its attempt to resurrect and recontextualize the pantheon of classic monsters, Dracula, Frankenstein's monster, the Wolfman, within a single, unified narrative. In many ways, it was an early attempt at what would later become a cinematic trend, the shared universe. Although the film did not spawn direct sequels or spin-offs, it hinted at a larger mythos waiting to be explored. This approach anticipated later efforts by other studios to build interconnected film worlds, such as the Marvel Cinematic Universe and Universal's own failed Dark Universe reboot that began with 2017's The Mummy. Beyond the film's plot and spectacle, Van Helsing is also a story about identity, redemption, and the eternal struggle between light and darkness. Van Helsing himself is revealed to be more than he seems, carrying secrets that tie him not only to the monsters he fights, but to a spiritual heritage he does not fully understand. Anna, too, is a figure caught between duty and despair, seeking to uphold her family's legacy while confronting a future that seems doomed. The Frankenstein monster, played with surprising pathos by Schuler Hensley, is depicted not as a villain, but as a creature seeking meaning and peace, hunted by others for what he represents rather than who he is. His presence in the story adds a tragic layer that echoes the themes of Mary Shelley's original novel, even amidst the bombastic action. Van Helsing was marketed as a summer blockbuster, released in May 2004 to capitalize on the early season rush of school breaks and high theater attendance. Its promotional campaign was vast, including merchandise, video games, comic book tie-ins, and even a Universal Studios theme park attraction. The film was expected to launch a new franchise and reignite interest in Universal's classic monster properties for a new generation. With a reported budget of over $160 million, it was one of the most expensive films of its year, and expectations were high. Although the film performed well at the box office, grossing over $300 million worldwide, it received mixed reviews from critics. Many praised its ambition, visual flair, and action sequences, but others criticized its convoluted plot, shallow character development, and over-reliance on special effects. Nevertheless, Van Helsing has gone on to achieve cult status among fans of Gothic horror and action fantasy hybrids. Its combination of old-world horror and modern spectacle struck a chord with certain audiences who appreciated its unabashed embrace of the fantastical and its clear love for the classic monster canon. As Van Helsing's narrative unfolds, the story reveals deeper layers that give the film more substance than its action-driven exterior might initially suggest. One of the core themes that emerges is the tension between science and faith. This theme is embodied in the character of Dr. Frankenstein, a man of science whose ambition to create life mirrors the age-old myth of man playing God. In Van Helsing, Frankenstein's scientific legacy is not portrayed as entirely evil, but rather as something powerful and misunderstood. His monster, far from being the embodiment of horror, is portrayed with compassion and tragic depth. He is a being rejected by society, feared not because of his actions but because of what he represents, the blurred line between humanity and monstrosity. This portrayal adds a reflective dimension to the film, encouraging viewers to question who the true monsters are, the creatures on the outside or the men who hunt them. Faith plays an equally significant role in the film. Van Helsing works for a secret religious order within the Vatican, a brotherhood dedicated to fighting the supernatural forces that threaten the world. The film does not overtly preach religious doctrine, but it does present faith as a guiding force in Van Helsing's mission. His struggle is not just physical but moral, a battle for his soul as much as for the fate of the world. He is a man haunted by a past he cannot remember, and his journey to confront Dracula becomes intertwined with a quest for self-understanding and spiritual redemption. The idea that evil must be confronted not just with weapons but with belief adds an operatic weight to the narrative, even if it is buried beneath layers of action and visual spectacle. In this sense, Van Helsing can be seen as a spiritual successor to earlier Gothic works that explore the duality of human nature. Just as Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, or the original Dracula novel, delved into the complexities of the human psyche and the coexistence of good and evil within one person, Van Helsing presents its protagonist as a man who must face the darkness within himself to overcome the darkness in the world. This theme is further emphasized by the revelation that Van Helsing may be an incarnation of the Archangel Gabriel, a divine warrior who has forgotten his true identity. This biblical subtext, though not explored in great depth, provides a mythic framework for Van Helsing's journey and elevates his mission from a personal vendetta to a cosmic battle between good and evil. Another important theme in the film is legacy and the burden of history. Anna Valerious' family has been fighting Dracula for centuries, and she is the last of her bloodline. Her quest is not just to defeat a vampire, but to redeem her family name and lift a generational curse. She carries the weight of her ancestors' failures and the hope of their redemption. This narrative thread gives her character emotional stakes and aligns her personal struggle with Van Helsing's larger mission. The film suggests that the past is never truly dead. It shapes the present and must be confronted before it can be transcended. In this way, Van Helsing becomes a story about healing historical wounds and finding closure for the ghosts of one's lineage. The visual design of the film further reinforces these themes. The castles, graveyards, laboratories, and ancient crypts are more than just set pieces. They are symbolic landscapes that represent the inner turmoil of the characters. Transylvania is depicted as a land frozen in time, trapped in an eternal struggle between light and darkness. The use of light and shadow in the cinematography is deliberate, highlighting the dualities that define the film: science and religion, man and monster, memory and identity. The Gothic architecture, elaborate costumes, and carefully choreographed action sequences all serve to immerse the viewer in a world where the boundaries between reality and myth are constantly shifting. The soundtrack, composed by Alan Silvestri, plays a critical role in shaping the film's tone. Known for his work on films such as Back to the Future, Forrest Gump, and The Avengers, Silvestri brings his signature style to Van Helsing with a score that blends orchestral grandeur with suspenseful motifs and heroic flourishes. The music underscores the film's operatic nature, enhancing both the emotional resonance of key scenes and the adrenaline of the action sequences. The recurring themes in the score help to unify the film's disparate elements and give it a sense of coherence, even when the narrative veers into chaotic territory. Van Helsing's attempt to weave together various mythologies into a single coherent universe was both ambitious and challenging. The film brings together Dracula, Frankenstein's monster, werewolves, and even elements of the Invisible Man and Jekyll and Hyde in subtle ways. It tries to establish a framework where these creatures coexist in a shared reality, connected by ancient prophecies, scientific experiments, and religious lore. This multi-monster approach echoes the classic universal horror films of the 1930s and 1940s, such as Frankenstein meets the Wolfman or House of Dracula, which also brought iconic monsters together in shared stories. However, Van Helsing reimagines these encounters with a modern twist, replacing slow-building tension with rapid-fire action and computer-generated spectacle. From a technical perspective, The film represents a significant moment in early 2000s filmmaking, particularly in its use of digital effects. The CGI used to create Dracula's transformations, the winged vampire brides, and the werewolves was cutting edge for its time, though it has aged with mixed results. The werewolf transformations, in particular, were a focal point of the film's visual effects, involving complex sequences that blended practical effects, green screen work, and full digital animation. The ambition was to create visceral and memorable monsters that could both terrify and fascinate. While the visuals were divisive, they helped push the boundaries of what was possible in genre filmmaking and inspired future films to experiment further with digital creature effects. The cultural impact of Van Helsing is somewhat difficult to quantify, as it did not ignite the long-running franchise Universal hoped for, but it left a distinct impression on the genre landscape of the 2000s. It tapped into the growing appetite for gothic fantasy that would later explode with franchises like Twilight and The Vampire Diaries. While those stories took a more romantic approach to their supernatural subjects, Van Helsing maintained a darker, more action-oriented tone that appealed to fans of traditional monster movies and fast-paced adventure alike. It also contributed to the rise of the antihero archetype in popular cinema. Protagonists who are flawed, conflicted, and often violent, but ultimately guided by a strong moral code. Van Helsing's mythological and symbolic underpinnings run deep, drawing from centuries of folklore, religious traditions, and literary canon. The film doesn't merely borrow characters like Dracula, Frankenstein's monster, or the werewolf. It weaves them into a new mythos that strives to connect their origins to an overarching spiritual conflict between good and evil. This ambitious narrative framework gives the film a mythic resonance, aligning it with archetypal stories that have been told and retold throughout human history. Even as the film immerses the viewer in fast-paced action, it remains rooted in this symbolic soil, using its characters and story arcs to echo universal themes of duality, redemption, and transformation. The character of Van Helsing himself, portrayed by Hugh Jackman, is a reimagined version of Abraham Van Helsing from Bram Stoker's 1897 novel Dracula. In the original, Van Helsing was an aged professor with deep knowledge of obscure lore and supernatural phenomena. In Stephen Sommers' version, however, Gabriel Van Helsing becomes a warrior figure, physically powerful and mysterious, with a shadowy past and unexplained longevity. The change in name from Abraham to Gabriel is not accidental. It positions Van Helsing within a biblical context, hinting at his divine origins and moral purpose. The Archangel Gabriel, in religious texts, is a messenger of God and often associated with annunciation, justice, and divine intervention. By invoking this name, the film suggests that its protagonist is not merely a man, but a celestial agent, perhaps even divine himself, an avenging force sent to battle evil incarnate. The revelation later in the film that Van Helsing may indeed be the Archangel Gabriel who has taken human form and forgotten his identity adds a profound layer to his character. It echoes ancient myths of fallen angels, divine beings who walk the earth unaware of their true nature. It also aligns Van Helsing with other mythic heroes who must go on a journey not just to defeat an external enemy, but to rediscover themselves. This hidden identity motif runs parallel to the theme of redemption that pervades the film. Van Helsing's inner turmoil, his sense of guilt for past sins he cannot remember, is part of his quest for salvation. By confronting the monsters of the world, he is also confronting the monster within. This internal conflict is mirrored in the film's portrayal of Dracula, who is far more than a simple villain. While he embodies evil, he is also a tragic figure, cursed to eternal undeath and driven by a need to create life through unnatural means. His children, born dead and suspended in glass wombs, are a grotesque reflection of his yearning for a legacy and permanence. His use of Frankenstein's technology to bring them to life is not just an act of scientific experimentation, it's an unholy inversion of the miracle of creation. Dracula becomes a perverse god figure, attempting to shape life from death, using science not to understand the universe, but to defy it. His actions parody both divine creation and human reproduction, making him a blasphemous symbol of unchecked ambition and corrupted love. This ties into one of the central symbols in Van Helsing, the act of creating life. Frankenstein's monster is the product of science gone beyond its ethical limits. Yet in contrast to Dracula's monstrous intentions, Frankenstein's creation emerges as the most humane character in the film. He is articulate, intelligent, and capable of great emotion. Hunted not for what he has done, but for what he represents, the monster is a poignant figure of innocence misunderstood by the world. He becomes a moral counterpoint to both Van Helsing and Dracula, standing as a symbol of the gray areas between good and evil, science and faith. Unlike the vampires and werewolves, who are enslaved to their instincts or their creator, Frankenstein's monster possesses free will and a soul, making him a unique figure in the film's cosmology. Werewolves in Van Helsing symbolize transformation, primal instinct, and the loss of self-control. In traditional folklore, the werewolf is a cursed figure, often tied to punishment or divine retribution. The film adheres to this interpretation but adds a unique twist. Only a werewolf has the power to kill Dracula. This creates an ironic inversion of power. Dracula, who is feared by all, can only be destroyed by a creature that he considers beneath him. It also sets up the climax of the film, where Van Helsing must embrace the beast within himself to defeat the greater evil. This transformation scene, both physically and symbolically, represents his acceptance of his dual nature. By channeling the beast within for a righteous cause, Van Helsing reclaims his agency and fulfills his destiny. It is the archetypal hero's journey, to descend into darkness in order to emerge into the light. Symbolism also runs through the film's setting. Transylvania, with its mist-covered forests, decaying castles, and crumbling churches, is not merely a backdrop, but a psychological landscape. It is a place frozen in myth, trapped in an eternal struggle between death and rebirth. Every ruined cathedral and haunted crypt speaks to a world where the sacred and the profane constantly collide. The production design, rich with Gothic details, reinforces the idea that this is a land shaped by centuries of suffering, legend, and divine punishment. In this context, Anna Valerious' mission to cleanse her family's name is not only personal but also metaphysical. She seeks to heal the land, break the cycle of violence, and restore spiritual balance. Anna herself is also laden with symbolic weight. She represents lineage, sacrifice, and the strength of tradition. Her commitment to her family's legacy, even in the face of overwhelming odds, speaks to the power of generational memory. She is not just a warrior, but a vessel of her ancestors' hopes and failures. Her eventual death in the climax of the film is framed as a redemptive sacrifice, fulfilling her bloodline's destiny and freeing her family's soul from damnation. The film closes with an image of her spirit reunited with her family in the afterlife, watching over Van Helsing from the stars. This celestial image, though somewhat sentimental, reinforces the film's recurring theme that death is not the end, but a passage to a higher state of existence. Van Helsing's blend of Christian iconography and pagan myth is another layer that gives the film its unique texture. Crucifixes, holy water, Vatican priests, and biblical references sit alongside werewolf curses, vampire brides, and alchemical experiments. The merging of these spiritual systems creates a tapestry of belief where faith, science, and magic coexist and often contradict each other. The characters operate in a world where moral truth is not always clear and where the tools of salvation may come from unexpected places. This syncretic approach gives the film a mythic quality, echoing the stories found in epic poetry, religious scripture, and ancient legend. Van Helsing marked a critical turning point for the careers of several actors involved, and its effects, both immediate and long-term, are significant in understanding the trajectory of Hollywood fantasy and action cinema in the early 2000s. Although it did not achieve the box office numbers or critical praise that Universal had hoped for, the film provided a massive platform for its leading talent, offered a showcase for the stylistic vision of its director Stephen Sommers, and helped solidify or redirect the careers of those involved in its making. Hugely instrumental to the film's appeal was Hugh Jackman, who played the titular character of Van Helsing. At the time of its release in 2004, Jackman was already becoming a household name, thanks primarily to his breakout role as Logan/Wolverine in the X-Men film series, which began in 2000. Wolverine had established him as a rugged, intense action hero with emotional depth, and Van Helsing was a natural extension of that persona, though with a more gothic, mythic flavor. Jackman's portrayal of Gabriel Van Helsing was built on the charisma, physicality, and vulnerability that made him popular with audiences. Though Van Helsing did not attain the cultural staying power of his role in X-Men, it expanded Jackman's range by placing him in a different narrative space, one where he could play a morally conflicted hero navigating supernatural threats in a stylized, high-fantasy world. Following Van Helsing, Jackman would go on to take on a wide variety of roles across different genres. He became known for his versatility, transitioning from action to musical theater with roles in Les Miserables and The Greatest Showman, and to more dramatic fare in films like Prisoners and The Prestige. Looking back, Van Helsing represents a kind of experiment in his career, one that demonstrated his ability to carry a blockbuster film largely on his own. It was a performance that, even if it did not lead to a franchise, reinforced his status as a reliable and bankable leading man capable of balancing action, emotion, and thematic complexity. Similarly, Kate Beckinsale, who played Anna Valerious, was riding the wave of popularity that followed her role in Underworld, 2003, where she portrayed the vampire Selene. Underworld had launched a franchise of its own, and Beckinsale's image as a gothic action heroine was still fresh and widely admired when she signed onto Van Helsing. Her performance as Anna solidified her position as one of the most recognizable female leads in supernatural action cinema of the decade. Strong-willed, athletic, and emotionally engaged, Anna was a character that required both dramatic intensity and physical performance. Beckinsale delivered both with assurance, helping to shape the modern archetype of the action fantasy heroine that would influence countless other roles in subsequent films and television. However, after Van Helsing, Beckinsale's career took a somewhat different trajectory. She continued to appear in the Underworld series, which became her signature franchise, but she struggled to find similarly strong and diverse roles outside the gothic action genre. While Van Helsing did not open many new doors for her, it cemented her image in a certain type of role, stylish, deadly, yet emotionally driven, which remains iconic in the world of fantasy cinema. The villainous heart of the film was brought to life by Richard Roxburgh, who portrayed Count Dracula. His version of the character was theatrical, flamboyant, and menacing, leaning into the tradition of operatic villains while still injecting a sense of sadness and longing into the role. Roxburgh had already shown his flair for genre with his portrayal of the Duke in Moulin Rouge, and as Moriarty in The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. Van Helsing allowed him to go full throttle in a role that demanded charm, danger, and larger-than-life presence. Although he didn't become a blockbuster villain mainstay, Roxburgh's Dracula was memorable and has since gained appreciation in cult circles for its boldness and unique interpretation. David Wenham, best known at the time for playing Faramir in the Lord of the Rings trilogy, took on the role of Friar Carl, Van Helsing's comic relief sidekick and tech expert. The character offered levity and cleverness in contrast to the grim tone of the story, and Wenham handled the role with comedic timing and earnestness. His presence helped humanize the film's more intense moments and added a sense of camaraderie to Van Helsing's otherwise solitary mission. Though Carl was a supporting character, he played an essential role in balancing the film's tone and connecting with the audience through humor and humility. Shuler Hensley's portrayal of Frankenstein's monster was another performance that received attention. Hensley, a stage actor with a background in musical theater, brought an unexpected gravitas and vulnerability to the role. His performance imbued the monster with dignity, sorrow, and unexpected wisdom, helping to elevate the creature from a plot device to a central emotional figure in the story. Hensley's work was praised for its pathos and helped establish Frankenstein's monster as a moral compass in a world overrun by conflicting forces of darkness. Stephen Sommers, the writer and director of Van Helsing, had already proven himself as a reliable action-adventure filmmaker with the success of The Mummy, 1999, and its sequel The Mummy Returns, 2001. Those films were known for their blend of humor, horror, and spectacle, and Sommers applied a similar formula to Van Helsing but with a much darker tone and greater narrative complexity. He envisioned Van Helsing not just as a standalone film, but as the beginning of a monster-based cinematic universe. Unfortunately, the film's mixed reception and underwhelming box office returns stalled those plans. Sommers did not direct many major films afterward, and Van Helsing stands as the peak of his ambition as a filmmaker, a sprawling, effects-heavy, genre-blending saga that aimed to revitalize classic monsters for a new era. From a production standpoint, Van Helsing was a massive undertaking. It had a budget of around $160 million, making it one of Universal's biggest investments at the time. The studio poured resources into elaborate sets, costumes, digital effects, and a sweeping orchestral score. Despite its shortcomings, the ambition behind the film was undeniable, and it has been noted in retrospective analyses as a precursor to modern franchise-building strategies. Universal's attempt to create a shared monster universe predated the Marvel Cinematic Universe by several years, and although it did not succeed, it laid groundwork that would later be revisited in the form of the short-lived Dark Universe initiative, beginning with The Mummy, 2017, starring Tom Cruise. In terms of merchandise and media tie-ins, Van Helsing was widely marketed through a variety of platforms. Action figures, posters, replica weapons, and a novelization were released alongside the film. A prequel animated short film titled Van Helsing, The London Assignment, was produced to expand the lore and provide background for Van Helsing's character. The animated short showed his earlier exploits in London as he battled Mr. Hyde, further deepening the idea that he had been fighting monsters for much longer than the events depicted in the main movie. While this kind of cross-media storytelling is commonplace today, at the time, it represented a bold attempt to create a multimedia mythology centered on a single protagonist. Van Helsing's box office performance and critical reception offer a fascinating lens through which to view the film's place in cinematic history. When it premiered in May of 2004, it arrived amidst significant hype. Universal had heavily promoted the movie as the summer's first major blockbuster, banking on its high production values, A-list cast, and nostalgic appeal of classic monsters reimagined for the 21st century. With a production budget reportedly around $160 million, Van Helsing was one of the most expensive films of its time, and expectations were high that it would deliver both critically and commercially. At the box office, Van Helsing had a strong opening weekend, earning over $50 million domestically in its first few days. Worldwide, the film ultimately grossed more than $300 million, which made it a commercial success in terms of gross revenue. However, when marketing costs and other overheads were factored in, the film's profitability was more modest than the raw numbers suggested. Despite its global earnings, Van Helsing failed to kickstart the monster-based franchise that Universal had hoped for. The studio had envisioned an interconnected universe of films, long before the Marvel Cinematic Universe had taken over Hollywood, with Van Helsing serving as the launching point. Instead, the tepid critical response and lukewarm word-of-mouth caused those plans to be quietly shelved. Critically, Van Helsing received mixed to negative reviews. Many reviewers praised the visual ambition, creature design, and action sequences, but criticized the plot's convoluted nature, uneven pacing, and what some felt was an overuse of special effects. Critics noted that the film often favored style over substance, leaning too heavily on CGI and set pieces at the expense of character development and coherent storytelling. Some also felt that the film's tonal shifts, from horror to comedy to melodrama, were jarring, making it difficult to emotionally connect with the characters. For a film with such high-concept ambitions and mythic overtones, critics expected more narrative cohesion and thematic clarity. Audiences, however, were somewhat more forgiving. While Van Helsing may not have lived up to its massive expectations for many viewers, it still drew appreciation for its escapist spectacle, gothic atmosphere, and unique blend of action and horror. Over time, many fans began to view the film more favorably, especially as it became a mainstay on DVD, streaming platforms, and television broadcasts. This second life helped foster a cult following, particularly among younger viewers who discovered the film without the baggage of its original hype. Within fan communities, Van Helsing was celebrated not for its flaws, but for its unapologetic commitment to building a fantastical universe filled with larger-than-life characters and sweeping stakes. Part of the film's enduring appeal lies in its visual style. The Gothic production design, Baroque architecture, steampunk-infused weaponry, and elaborate costumes created a world that felt both timeless and distinct. The dark forests, cobblestone villages, snow-covered castles, and underground lairs were rich with atmosphere, echoing the look of classic Universal monster movies from the 1930s while updating them with digital enhancements and modern cinematography. In this sense, Van Helsing served as both homage and reinvention, paying tribute to the golden age of horror while attempting to bring its icons into a new era of blockbuster storytelling. The creature effects also deserve special mention. Dracula's brides, for example, were given the ability to fly and morph, their appearances shifting between seductive beauty and monstrous terror. Their transformation sequences were fluid and eerie, utilizing then cutting-edge digital effects to create a sense of otherworldliness. Similarly, the werewolf transformations were some of the most dynamic ever put to screen at that point, involving complex makeup, prosthetics, and digital overlays. Rather than a slow, painful metamorphosis like those seen in traditional werewolf films, the changes in Van Helsing were explosive and dramatic, underscoring the violent nature of the beast within. Dracula's castle, Frankenstein's lab, and the Vatican's secret underground armory were all designed with meticulous attention to detail, reinforcing the world-building that Sommers aimed to achieve. Even when the narrative faltered, the film's aesthetic remained consistently imaginative and immersive. This emphasis on world design over realism gave Van Helsing a sense of operatic grandeur, which has become increasingly appreciated in hindsight as modern blockbusters sometimes favor generic or over-polished visuals. The creative risks taken with set and creature design helped distinguish Van Helsing from other genre films of the early 2000s. Beyond aesthetics, Van Helsing also captured the cultural mood of its time. The early 2000s were a period when fantasy and horror were re-emerging in mainstream cinema with renewed vigor. The success of the Lord of the Rings trilogy, Harry Potter, and Pirates of the Caribbean signaled a return to escapist, mythologically rooted narratives. Van Helsing tapped into that same appetite for richly imagined worlds and heroic quests, though with a darker, more gothic tone. It offered viewers a blend of action and supernatural horror, with religious undertones and existential questions woven into its monster-hunting narrative. This thematic complexity is one of the reasons why Van Helsing remains compelling. At its core, the film is about identity, redemption, and the eternal struggle between light and darkness. Van Helsing is a man without a past, tormented by dreams of violence and guilt he cannot understand. His journey to uncover his true self, possibly as the Archangel Gabriel, is mirrored in the spiritual journeys of the other characters. Anna seeks to redeem her family line and protect her people. Frankenstein's monster seeks to prove that he has a soul. Even Dracula, in his twisted way, is seeking legacy and survival through unnatural means. These arcs all revolve around the central idea of transformation, both physical and moral, making the film a surprisingly layered meditation on what it means to be human, monstrous, or divine. The film's religious motifs and iconography also spark discussion. Set within a framework of Vatican intrigue, vampire lore, and biblical prophecy, Van Helsing blends Catholic tradition with mythological horror. Scenes of exorcism, crucifixes used as weapons, and the concept of divine punishment run throughout the film, creating a spiritual dimension that goes beyond standard action fare. These elements have contributed to academic interest in the movie, particularly among scholars of religion, myth, and pop culture. Van Helsing may not have presented a strictly theological narrative, but its invocation of divine justice, resurrection, and sacrifice opens it to interpretations that extend beyond the surface plot. As the years passed following its release, Van Helsing began to find renewed appreciation, not only from fans but also from filmmakers, designers, and writers who cited it as a key influence in shaping the Gothic action genre. Though it may not have received widespread praise during its initial run, its creative ambition and commitment to blending myth, horror, and high fantasy left a lasting impact on how supernatural stories could be told in a modern cinematic language. The film's stylistic choices and world-building elements have echoed through various franchises and genres, influencing the direction of many dark fantasy narratives in both film and television. One of the clearest areas where Van Helsing left a mark was in the evolution of Gothic action. Prior to the early 2000s, Gothic themes were typically reserved for slower-paced horror films that relied heavily on suspense and atmosphere. But Van Helsing demonstrated that Gothic elements could coexist with fast-paced action, elaborate set pieces, and dynamic visual effects. It helped pave the way for films like Underworld and Constantine, which adopted similar aesthetics and tones: dark, romantic, violent, and mythologically rich. These films took cues from Van Helsing's fusion of religion, mythology, and modern spectacle, showing that supernatural storytelling could be intensified by visual energy without losing thematic depth. Television also absorbed this shift. Series like Penny Dreadful, The Strain, Salem, and even Supernatural borrowed from Van Helsing's blend of action horror and theological exploration. These shows often featured reluctant heroes battling monsters while dealing with their own internal demons, mirroring Van Helsing's character arc. The look and feel of these productions, dark color palettes, elaborate period costumes, fog-drenched environments, and morally ambiguous characters, owe something to the visual language that Van Helsing helped solidify. In video games, the impact was perhaps even more pronounced. Games such as Castlevania, Lords of Shadow, Bloodborne, and The Order 1886 share many thematic and visual parallels with Van Helsing. The concept of a lone warrior navigating a twisted, Baroque world filled with ancient evils and moral uncertainty can be seen across these titles. In fact, The Incredible Adventures of Van Helsing, a series of action role-playing games released beginning in 2013, was directly inspired by the film and capitalized on its aesthetic. It transformed the character into a steampunk-flavored hero who battles creatures of myth and science in an industrial-era landscape. The success of that game franchise showed that the world introduced in the film could thrive in interactive form, suggesting that its mythology had more longevity than initially believed. Another major point of influence from Van Helsing is its treatment of classic monsters. While previous films portrayed vampires, werewolves, and Frankenstein's monster in more traditional or isolated narratives, Van Helsing brought them together into a single interconnected story. This laid a kind of blueprint for the future integration of monster characters across shared storylines. Although Universal's official dark universe faltered, other films picked up on the concept of blending monster mythology into cohesive, action-oriented adventures. The Monsterverse developed by Legendary Pictures, with films like Godzilla, Kong, Skull Island, and Godzilla vs. Kong, follows a similar idea of interwoven mythologies, albeit focused on kaiju rather than gothic creatures. Van Helsing also contributed to a broader cinematic trend, the embrace of genre hybridity. Its combination of horror, fantasy, action, mystery, and romance demonstrated that audiences were open to stories that defied easy classification. While critics may have faulted the film for being too overstuffed or tonally inconsistent, later works would learn to refine this hybrid model. The Twilight Saga, for instance, took the vampire romance to mainstream teen audiences, while The Hunger Games blended dystopia with personal drama. These franchises all benefited from the audience's growing familiarity with stories that combined supernatural or fantastical elements with emotionally grounded character arcs. The film's romantic subtext and tragic undertones, especially the relationship between Van Helsing and Anna, also played a part in reshaping expectations around heroism and sacrifice. Their bond, built not on traditional romantic progression but on mutual respect and shared purpose, ended in heartbreak rather than a neat resolution. Anna's death is not reversed, and Van Helsing is left to continue his journey alone. This refusal to provide a conventionally happy ending gave the film a sense of weight and gravity that distinguished it from other action blockbusters. It showed that heroism often comes with irreversible loss and that victory does not always mean personal fulfillment. This theme would later appear in many modern genre films, from the Marvel Cinematic Universe to standalone dramas like Logan, also starring Hugh Jackman, which echoes similar ideas of mortality and reluctant heroism. There's also something to be said about how Van Helsing helped evolve the portrayal of female characters in genre films. While Anna Valerious fits into the archetype of the action heroine, she is not reduced to a sidekick or damsel in distress. She is central to the narrative, drives key plot points, and participates equally in battles. Her character is layered with responsibility, fear, pride, and personal history. This was in line with a broader cultural movement during the 2000s that demanded stronger representation for women in genre media. Alongside characters like Celine from Underworld and Alice from Resident Evil, Anna contributed to a redefinition of the female action hero, not as a novelty, but as a compelling, capable lead. The cultural legacy of Van Helsing also lives on through fan communities and reinterpretations. On social media platforms, fan edits, GIFs, memes, and tributes keep the film alive in the public imagination. Every Halloween, costumes based on the film's characters make appearances, and fanfiction continues to explore the untapped potential of the world it created. Online forums and fan essays often discuss the film's themes in detail, and some even propose alternate continuities or expanded universes that could have emerged had the film succeeded more conventionally. This level of engagement underscores the movie's emotional and imaginative impact, even 2 decades after its release. As a piece of genre history, Van Helsing remains a case study in ambition. It dared to take beloved characters with long cultural histories and place them into a single universe, filled with high-stakes adventure and operatic melodrama. While it didn't achieve the critical or commercial dominance Universal had hoped for, it sparked enough imagination and admiration to influence an entire wave of genre storytelling that came after. In an era where safe, formulaic blockbusters often dominate the screen, Van Helsing's flaws now seem less like missteps and more like the growing pains of a film trying to do something truly original. Van Helsing, beneath its thrilling action and gothic aesthetic, carries a rich undercurrent of mythological and religious symbolism that elevates the film from mere monster spectacle to a work layered with archetypal meaning. The story is not only about the physical battle between good and evil, but also a deeper internal struggle concerning faith, identity, sacrifice, and redemption. Many elements in the film draw from biblical imagery, Christian tradition, and classical mythology, all of which inform the choices and trajectories of the main characters. This symbolic depth contributes to the film's enduring resonance and invites more thoughtful reflection upon repeat viewings. At the heart of Van Helsing's symbolic framework is its protagonist, Gabriel Van Helsing, whose name alone hints at spiritual origins. As the film progresses, there are strong indications that Van Helsing is more than a man. He may, in fact, be the earthly incarnation of the Archangel Gabriel. This allusion is not subtle. Several characters refer to him as the left hand of God, a title sometimes associated with the Archangel in Christian tradition. This idea is reinforced when he is revealed to be centuries old, having no memory of his past, and being burdened by dreams of violence and guilt. In many religious stories, Gabriel is a messenger and warrior, sent by God to carry out divine justice. Similarly, Van Helsing serves as an agent of the Vatican, sent to purge evil from the world. He is not just a monster hunter, but a symbol of divine retribution, acting on a higher moral plane even as he struggles with his own sins. This duality between human and divine, warrior and sinner, is central to the film's themes. Van Helsing is a tragic hero in the classical sense. He fights evil not out of vengeance or glory, but because he believes it is his duty. Yet he is haunted by actions he cannot remember, suggesting that even the righteous are not without guilt. His journey is one of redemption, both personal and spiritual. He must come to terms with who he is and what he has done, which parallels many biblical figures who fall from grace and must find their way back to the light. The film's use of this redemptive arc adds a profound layer to the character, transforming him from an action figure into a symbol of penitent justice. Dracula, Van Helsing's chief adversary, also functions on a symbolic level. He is not merely a vampire lord. He is a representation of corruption, pride, and perverted creation. In the film, Dracula is depicted as a fallen nobleman who made a pact with the devil, becoming immortal but cursed. His goal is to create life, not through natural or divine means, but through alchemical and scientific manipulation. His use of Frankenstein's monster and stolen technology to birth an army of vampire offspring mirrors the biblical warning against hubris and playing God. Dracula's obsession with legacy and control reveals a deeper fear of death and divine judgment. He is a distorted mirror of Van Helsing, once human, now something else entirely, forever beyond redemption. Anna Valerious, the last of her family line, represents the mortal world caught in the crossfire between divine and infernal forces. Her duty is to kill Dracula and thus save her family's soul from eternal damnation, a narrative that closely echoes the idea of generational sin and salvation present in religious doctrine. Anna's role is not only that of a fighter, but also a redeemer. She carries the weight of her ancestors' failure and seeks to undo the curse that has plagued her lineage for centuries. Her character symbolizes the possibility of grace through courage and sacrifice. Her death, though tragic, is portrayed not as a failure, but as a noble offering. She dies in the act of saving another, reflecting the Christian ideal of selfless love and martyrdom. Frankenstein's monster, arguably the most complex character in the film, serves as a spiritual touchstone for the narrative's moral questions. He is a creature made by man, rejected by society, and hunted as an abomination. Yet he is the only character who consistently displays moral clarity and compassion. He quotes scripture, mourns loss, and shows kindness to those in need. In many ways, he represents the soul, misunderstood, feared, and fragile, yet ultimately good. The film uses him to challenge assumptions about monstrosity. If the creature, stitched together from corpses and given life through unnatural means, can possess a soul, then what truly defines humanity? Is it our origin, our appearance, or our actions? This question ties into a recurring theme throughout Van Helsing, the blurred line between man and monster. Nearly every character grapples with duality. Van Helsing is a man who might be an angel. Dracula is a man turned demon. Frankenstein's monster is a creature with a soul. Anna is a noble warrior, yet driven by vengeance. Even the werewolves, cursed men who transform into beasts under the full moon, symbolize the internal conflict between civility and savagery. In a world where appearances deceive and morality is not black and white, the film suggests that humanity lies not in form but in choice. The werewolf curse, in particular, serves as a metaphor for the battle between our higher and lower natures. Van Helsing himself becomes a werewolf in the final act, and it is only by embracing the beast within that he is able to defeat Dracula. This moment is rich with symbolic meaning. In religious traditions, especially within Christianity, the idea of transformation, dying to the old self and being reborn anew, is central. Van Helsing's transformation into a werewolf can be read not as a descent into savagery, but as a moment of acceptance, where he integrates all aspects of himself, including his violent past and divine nature. It is this wholeness that allows him to confront evil and triumph. The film's setting also contributes to its symbolic depth. The Transylvanian landscape, with its mist-covered mountains, crumbling castles, and haunted forests, represents a liminal space, a borderland between the known and the unknown, life and death, heaven and hell. It is a world where spiritual and physical realities collide, where the sacred and the profane intertwine. Within this setting, the characters are constantly tested, not only by monsters, but by their own fears and doubts. The journey through this dark terrain becomes a metaphor for the spiritual journey of the soul seeking salvation. Even the Vatican's secret order, which commissions Van Helsing's missions, serves as a symbol of organized faith confronting chaos. The hidden armory filled with ancient weapons, scrolls, and holy relics resembles a war chest of spiritual tools. The fact that Van Helsing operates in the shadows suggests that the battle between good and evil is ongoing and often hidden from the eyes of the world. This clandestine war echoes the idea, found in many religious texts that spiritual warfare occurs beyond human perception but impacts all aspects of existence. Music and sound design also play a role in reinforcing the film's mythic tone. The score, composed by Alan Silvestri, uses choral elements, organ flourishes, and string arrangements to evoke a sense of the sacred and the epic. These musical cues often underscore moments of revelation, sacrifice, or divine confrontation, helping to elevate scenes beyond mere action into the realm of allegory. Van Helsing's role in Hugh Jackman's career marks a significant turning point, showcasing his ability to lead a big-budget action fantasy film with both physicality and emotional depth. Prior to Van Helsing, Jackman had established himself as a versatile actor on stage and screen, but it was this 2004 film that propelled him into international stardom, opening doors for him to become one of the most recognizable faces in contemporary blockbuster cinema. Before Van Helsing, Hugh Jackman was known primarily for his theater work, having earned acclaim on the Australian stage and making notable appearances in film and television. His breakthrough on screen came with the musical film The Prestige and the miniseries Corelli's Mandolin, but it was his casting as the iconic Marvel character Wolverine in X-Men 2000 that first brought him widespread attention. Jackman's portrayal of Wolverine, a brooding, tough, and morally complex mutant, resonated with audiences and critics alike, establishing a foundation for a long-running and beloved franchise. The transition from playing Wolverine to embodying Van Helsing demonstrated Jackman's range and his willingness to take on diverse genre roles. The character of Gabriel Van Helsing allowed Jackman to explore a darker, more gothic hero archetype, blending action, romance, and supernatural horror. His performance combined intense physical combat scenes with moments of vulnerability, showing a depth beyond a typical action hero. Jackman's commitment to doing many of his own stunts and his portrayal of the internal conflicts faced by Van Helsing contributed to the film's emotional core. Van Helsing's success, despite mixed reviews, reinforced Jackman's bankability as a lead actor in high-concept fantasy and action films. It helped him break away from being pigeonholed solely as Wolverine, leading to roles in other varied genres such as drama, Pride and Prejudice, The Fountain, musical, Les Miserables, and science fiction, Real Steel. Jackman's ability to imbue his characters with charisma, physical presence, and emotional nuance made him a versatile star who could carry both commercial and critically acclaimed projects. The film also positioned Jackman within a growing trend of actors who embodied mythic or legendary heroes in genre films. Following in the footsteps of actors like Arnold Schwarzenegger in The Terminator and Keanu Reeves in The Matrix, Jackman's Van Helsing was a character who bridged classical heroic traits with modern sensibilities. This role helped cement the appeal of action heroes who are not just muscular fighters, but are also psychologically complex, tormented, and driven by a personal code of honor. Van Helsing's place in Jackman's career is further solidified by the continued popularity of the character Wolverine. The X-Men series grew to become one of the most successful comic book franchises ever, and Jackman's repeated portrayals of Wolverine over nearly 2 decades turned him into a cultural icon. Fans often note that Van Helsing's darker tone and gothic aesthetic share sensibilities with the X-Men films, especially those that explored themes of identity, exile, and transformation. Jackman's ability to navigate these themes in both franchises highlights his skill in bringing depth to genre heroes. Moreover, Van Helsing influenced Jackman's approach to other roles where the blending of action and emotional drama was required. His later performance in Logan, 2017, the critically acclaimed and emotionally charged finale to the Wolverine story, echoes many of the themes first explored in Van Helsing: redemption, mortality, and the loneliness of the hero. Critics and fans have pointed out that Logan's exploration of a weary warrior facing the end of his journey can trace some of its narrative DNA back to Jackman's portrayal of Van Helsing. Beyond Hugh Jackman, the film also provided a significant platform for other cast members. Kate Beckinsale, who played Anna Valerious, gained increased visibility and credibility in action and horror genres. Her performance in Van Helsing led to later roles in franchises such as Underworld, where she played Selene, a vampire warrior queen. Beckinsale's ability to portray strong, multifaceted female protagonists in genre films owes something to her work in Van Helsing, where Anna was neither merely a love interest nor a victim, but an active participant in the story's battles. Richard Roxburgh's portrayal of Dracula added to his body of work as a character actor capable of commanding presence in villainous roles. Already known for his roles in Australian cinema, Roxburgh's Dracula was both menacing and tragic, a performance that showcased his range in inhabiting complex antagonists. His work in Van Helsing allowed him to reach international audiences and demonstrated the importance of a well-developed villain in elevating genre storytelling. The film's supporting cast, including David Wenham as Frankenstein's monster and Shuler Harrison as Friar Ludwig, also contributed memorable performances that balanced humor, pathos, and menace. The ensemble's chemistry and commitment to their roles helped give the film a sense of cohesion despite its broad scope and ambitious blend of genres. This strong cast ensemble is a key factor in why Van Helsing remains engaging to viewers decades later. Van Helsing's impact on the careers of its cast is part of a larger trend in genre cinema, where actors often become closely identified with iconic roles that define their professional trajectories. For Jackman, Van Helsing was a bridge from stage actor to international action star, solidifying his status in a competitive industry. For Beckinsale and Roxburgh, the film offered opportunities to take on larger-scale projects with global exposure. Together, the cast performances helped give the film a lasting presence in popular culture. In the broader context of film history, Van Helsing is often cited as an early example of the 2000s wave of hybrid genre films that combined horror, fantasy, and action. It anticipated many stylistic and thematic trends that would become staples in blockbuster cinema over the next 2 decades. Its influence can be seen in the increasing willingness of studios to invest in dark, mythologically rich stories with strong lead characters who defy simple categorization. Van Helsing's visual and narrative ambitions also foreshadowed the rise of cinematic universes and franchise building. Although Universal's attempt to launch a dark universe starting with Van Helsing was ultimately unsuccessful, the film's approach to combining classic monsters into a shared narrative laid the groundwork for other successful franchise experiments. The film's legacy lives on in the way studios approach interconnected storytelling, character crossovers, and genre blending. Van Helsing's box office performance and critical reception reveal much about the complexities of launching a high-concept, effects-driven genre film in the early 2000s. While the movie had an impressive production budget and significant studio backing, its commercial results were mixed, and its critical response was varied. Analyzing these aspects sheds light on the dynamics of blockbuster filmmaking, audience expectations, and the evolving landscape of genre cinema at the time. The film was produced with an estimated budget of around $160 million, making it one of the more expensive projects of its era. Universal Pictures invested heavily in state-of-the-art special effects, elaborate sets, and a star-studded cast. Director Stephen Sommers, who had experience with action and visual effects-heavy films, was brought on to helm the project. The studio aimed to capitalize on the resurgence of supernatural horror and fantasy films popularized in the late 1990s and early 2000s, hoping to create a franchise that could rival other monster-based properties. Upon its release in May 2004, Van Helsing debuted at #1 at the box office, grossing over $40 million domestically in its opening weekend. Worldwide, it ultimately earned approximately $120 million. While these numbers were respectable, the film did not recoup its production and marketing costs immediately, and its profitability was considered modest by studio standards. This outcome was partly due to the film's high budget and partly because it competed against several other blockbuster releases that year, including Harry Potter and The Prisoner of Azkaban and Spider-Man 2. Critically, Van Helsing received mixed reviews. Many critics praised its visual style, ambitious production design, and the performances of its lead actors, particularly Hugh Jackman and Kate Beckinsale. The film's fast-paced action sequences and creative monster designs were highlighted as strengths that contributed to its entertainment value. However, some reviewers criticized the film for its convoluted plot, uneven pacing, and reliance on special effects over character development. The screenplay was seen by some as lacking depth, and the dialogue was occasionally described as cliched or overly expositional. Despite the mixed critical reception, Van Helsing found a loyal fanbase and has since become regarded as a cult favorite. Fans appreciated the film's blend of gothic horror with modern action-adventure elements, as well as its respectful nods to classic monster lore. The movie's dark atmosphere, combined with moments of humor and romance, created a unique tone that distinguished it from more straightforward horror or fantasy films. Over time, many viewers have revisited Van Helsing with a more appreciative perspective, valuing it as an entertaining and ambitious genre hybrid. The film's marketing campaign was extensive and leveraged its iconic monsters to attract diverse audiences. Trailers emphasized the dynamic action sequences and the clash between Van Helsing and Dracula, highlighting the supernatural spectacle. Promotional materials featured striking images of Van Helsing wielding his iconic crossbow, Anna's mystical powers, and the eerie creatures that populate the film. Merchandise, including action figures and collectible items, was produced to support the film's brand identity. However, some critics and analysts argue that the marketing did not fully convey the film's complex mythology and symbolic depth, potentially limiting its appeal to a broader audience interested in the story's thematic richness. The focus on action and horror elements might have overshadowed the film's subtler narrative layers, causing it to be pigeonholed as just another monster movie rather than a multifaceted cinematic experience. Van Helsing's release also coincided with shifting audience tastes. By 2004, the horror genre was experiencing transformations, with a move toward more psychological and atmospheric horror, as seen in films like The Ring and the others. Simultaneously, superhero and fantasy films were gaining momentum, often favoring serialized storytelling and character-driven narratives. Van Helsing's hybrid approach was innovative, but may have struggled to find its perfect audience amid these evolving trends. In the years following its theatrical run, Van Helsing gained additional recognition through home video sales, television broadcasts, and streaming platforms. Its availability to new audiences has helped solidify its cult status and allowed fans to engage with its lore and characters more deeply. Fan communities have grown around discussions of the film's mythology, special effects, and character dynamics, often comparing it to other monster and gothic-themed media. Critically, the film has been reassessed in light of contemporary genre cinema. Many reviewers now acknowledge Van Helsing's ambitious attempt to blend action, horror, and fantasy, and appreciate its practical effects and creature designs, which stand out amid modern CGI-heavy productions. The performances, particularly Jackman's and Beckinsale's, are recognized for bringing emotional weight to an otherwise effects-driven narrative. Van Helsing's box office and critical journey reflect the challenges of balancing artistic ambition with commercial viability. The film's mixture of genres, while creative, may have made it harder to market and categorize, leading to a split reception. Nonetheless, its impact on genre filmmaking is evident in how it inspired later films and series to explore hybrid storytelling and complex mythologies within the supernatural horror framework. The film also contributed to the revitalization of classic monster characters in popular culture. By combining Dracula, Frankenstein's monster, and the werewolf mythos in a single narrative, Van Helsing anticipated the growing trend of cinematic universes and monster mashups that would be explored in the years ahead. Although its attempt to launch a franchise was not fully realized at the time, the concept influenced future projects that sought to unify diverse mythologies and characters. In addition to its cultural footprint, Van Helsing's commercial performance offers insights into the economic realities of early 21st century filmmaking. Big-budget productions with heavy special effects were becoming increasingly expensive to produce, and studios were still learning how to effectively market genre hybrids to a mass audience. The film's mixed financial results likely contributed to more cautious approaches in the industry towards similar projects, emphasizing the importance of clear branding and audience targeting. Today, Van Helsing serves as a case study in balancing spectacle with story, ambition with accessibility. Its box office and critical history remind filmmakers and studios that innovation in genre cinema can be both rewarding and risky, and that cultivating a lasting legacy often involves time and the growth of dedicated fan communities. Van Helsing's legacy within the film industry and popular culture is multifaceted, reflecting its role as both a genre pioneer and a beloved cult classic. Despite its initial mixed reception, the film has influenced the portrayal of classic monsters in contemporary media and contributed to the broader evolution of supernatural storytelling in cinema and beyond. Its enduring appeal can be traced to its unique blend of gothic horror, action-adventure, and mythological depth, which continues to inspire filmmakers, writers, and audiences around the world. One of Van Helsing's most significant contributions to popular culture is its reinvigoration of classic monster lore for the modern era. By uniting Dracula, Frankenstein's monster, and werewolves in a single narrative, the film paved the way for similar crossovers and shared universe concepts that have since become common in film and television. This approach to storytelling, where iconic characters from different mythologies interact within one cohesive world, has been embraced by studios looking to capitalize on fan interest in interconnected narratives. Van Helsing's attempt to establish a universe of monsters, although not immediately successful commercially, set a precedent that informed later projects such as the Universal Monsters reboot efforts and even the MonsterVerse franchise, which includes films like Godzilla and Kong. The film also influenced the aesthetic and tonal direction of supernatural action movies. Van Helsing's use of elaborate costumes, gothic set designs, and stylized cinematography contributed to a heightened visual language that has inspired countless filmmakers. The combination of dark fantasy elements with fast-paced action scenes and humor helped create a template for later films that sought to balance seriousness with entertainment, appealing to both horror fans and mainstream audiences. This balance is now a hallmark of many popular supernatural franchises, demonstrating Van Helsing's lasting impact on genre blending. In addition to its influence on film, Van Helsing's mythology has resonated with other forms of media, including video games, comics, and television series. The film's depiction of Van Helsing as a versatile monster hunter with a mysterious past has been echoed in numerous games and graphic novels that explore similar characters battling supernatural forces. These media often draw on Van Helsing's iconography and narrative themes, reinforcing the character's place in the broader canon of monster hunting heroes. The success of television shows featuring vampire hunters and monster slayers, such as Buffy the Vampire Slayer and Supernatural, shares thematic ties with Van Helsing's blend of horror and heroism. The film's characters have become cultural touchstones in their own right. Hugh Jackman's portrayal of Van Helsing remains one of his most memorable roles, contributing to his identity as an actor capable of embodying mythic heroes. Kate Beckinsale's Anna Valerious helped redefine the role of female leads in action horror films, portraying a strong, independent woman who is both a warrior and a source of emotional depth. Richard Roxburgh's Dracula stands out as a complex villain, combining menace with tragic dignity. These performances have influenced casting and character development in subsequent genre films, encouraging more nuanced portrayals of heroes and villains alike. The film's special effects and makeup work are also noteworthy aspects of its legacy. The practical effects used to create the werewolves, Frankenstein's monster, and other creatures have been praised for their craftsmanship and creativity. In an era increasingly dominated by computer-generated imagery, Van Helsing's blend of practical and digital effects offers a reminder of the power of tangible artistry in creating immersive worlds. Many fans and industry professionals continue to admire the film's effects work as a high point in early 2000s genre filmmaking. Van Helsing's cultural impact extends beyond its cinematic achievements. It helped spark renewed interest in Gothic horror and the enduring appeal of classic monsters, contributing to the popularization of vampire and werewolf themes in the early 21st century. This renewed fascination can be seen in the success of book series like Twilight and the Vampire Chronicles, as well as in the proliferation of vampire-themed television shows and movies. Van Helsing's influence is part of this broader resurgence, which blends traditional horror motifs with contemporary storytelling sensibilities. Looking to the future, there have been ongoing discussions and rumors about potential revivals or reboots related to Van Helsing and its universe. The character of Gabriel Van Helsing remains a compelling figure for filmmakers and audiences interested in exploring the eternal battle between good and evil through a supernatural lens. With advances in filmmaking technology and a growing appetite for serialized storytelling, there is significant potential for the character and mythology to be revisited in new formats, including streaming series, video games, or cinematic reboots. Any future projects would likely seek to build on the foundation laid by the 2004 film, emphasizing the rich symbolism, character complexity, and thematic depth that have come to define Van Helsing's appeal. Such projects could explore unexplored facets of the lore, including Van Helsing's angelic origins, the spiritual dimensions of his mission, and the intricate relationships between the film's iconic monsters. The challenge and opportunity lie in balancing respect for the original material with fresh storytelling that resonates with contemporary audiences. In conclusion, Van Helsing's legacy is that of a trailblazing film that redefined how classic monsters could be portrayed in modern cinema. It combined thrilling action, gothic atmosphere, and symbolic storytelling to create a unique genre hybrid that has inspired a generation of filmmakers and fans. Its impact is felt not only in the continued popularity of its characters, but also in the ongoing evolution of supernatural narratives across media. As a film, Van Helsing stands as a testament to the enduring power of myth and the timeless struggle between light and darkness. Van Helsing's role in Hugh Jackman's career marks a significant turning point, showcasing his ability to lead a big-budget action fantasy film with both physicality and emotional depth. Prior to Van Helsing, Jackman had established himself as a versatile actor on stage and screen, but it was this 2004 film that propelled him into international stardom, opening doors for him to become one of the most recognizable faces in contemporary blockbuster cinema. Before Van Helsing, Hugh Jackman was known primarily for his theater work, having earned acclaim on the Australian stage and making notable appearances in film and television. His breakthrough on screen came with the musical film The Prestige and the miniseries Corelli's Mandolin, but it was his casting as the iconic Marvel character Wolverine in X-Men 2000 that first brought him widespread attention. Jackman's portrayal of Wolverine, a brooding, tough, and morally complex mutant, resonated with audiences and critics alike, establishing a foundation for a long-running and beloved franchise. The transition from playing Wolverine to embodying Van Helsing demonstrated Jackman's range and his willingness to take on diverse genre roles. The character of Gabriel Van Helsing allowed Jackman to explore a darker, more gothic hero archetype, blending action, romance, and supernatural horror. His performance combined intense physical combat scenes with moments of vulnerability, showing a depth beyond a typical action hero. Jackman's commitment to doing many of his own stunts and his portrayal of the internal conflicts faced by Van Helsing contributed to the film's emotional core. Van Helsing's success, despite mixed reviews, reinforced Jackman's bankability as a lead actor in high-concept fantasy and action films. It helped him break away from being pigeonholed solely as Wolverine, leading to roles in other varied genres such as drama, Pride and Prejudice, The Fountain, musical, Les Miserables, and science fiction, Real Steel. Jackman's ability to imbue his characters with charisma, physical presence, and emotional nuance made him a versatile star who could carry both commercial and critically acclaimed projects. The film also positioned Jackman within a growing trend of actors who embodied mythic or legendary heroes in genre films. Following in the footsteps of actors like Arnold Schwarzenegger in The Terminator and Keanu Reeves in The Matrix, Jackman's Van Helsing was a character who bridged classical heroic traits with modern sensibilities. This role helped cement the appeal of action heroes who are not just muscular fighters, but are also psychologically complex, tormented, and driven by a personal code of honor. Van Helsing's place in Jackman's career is further solidified by the continued popularity of the character Wolverine. The X-Men series grew to become one of the most successful comic book franchises ever, and Jackman's repeated portrayals of Wolverine over nearly 2 decades turned him into a cultural icon. Fans often note that Van Helsing's darker tone and gothic aesthetic share sensibilities with the X-Men films, especially those that explored themes of identity, exile, and transformation. Jackman's ability to navigate these themes in both franchises highlights his skill in bringing depth to genre heroes. Moreover, Van Helsing influenced Jackman's approach to other roles, where the blending of action and emotional drama was required. His later performance in Logan, 2017, the critically acclaimed and emotionally charged finale to the Wolverine story, echoes many of the themes first explored in Van Helsing: redemption, mortality, and the loneliness of the hero. Critics and fans have pointed out that Logan's exploration of a weary warrior facing the end of his journey can trace some of its narrative DNA back to Jackman's portrayal of Van Helsing. Beyond Hugh Jackman, the film also provided a significant platform for other cast members. Kate Beckinsale, who played Anna Valerious, gained increased visibility and credibility in action and horror genres. Her performance in Van Helsing led to later roles in franchises such as Underworld, where she played Selene, a vampire warrior queen. Beckinsale's ability to portray strong, multifaceted female protagonists in genre films owes something to her work in Van Helsing, where Anna was neither merely a love interest nor a victim, but an active participant in the story's battles. Richard Roxburgh's portrayal of Dracula added to his body of work as a character actor capable of commanding presence in villainous roles. Already known for his roles in Australian cinema, Roxburgh's Dracula was both menacing and tragic, a performance that showcased his range in inhabiting complex antagonists.